Just a quick little overview. I'm Jeremy. Thanks for coming. I work with a company called Treasure Data. We do all kinds of super interesting things around customer data platform management. I need my speaker notes. That's a problem, isn't it? We basically are trying to radically simplify customer data management. So our enterprise customer data platform helps harness and analyze the information that you or our customers need to create more of a data-driven enterprise, bringing all the data into one place for a single kind of actionable 360-degree view of the customers. We try to really do a little bit like all of our metric stuff do for marketing and all kinds of other organizations. Getting people to better know their customers, engage in meaningful ways and across the entire journey, and measure our success. I am at that tiny little cryptic Twitter handle down there. That also works for Gmail and also works for GitHub, so you can find me all over the place. But let's get into the meat of it. So my trajectory, how do I go? Oh, there we go. Excuse me. My trajectory from individual contributor to manager, I think, is not uncommon in our industry. If we look at the last sort of 10 years, starting from basic dev role, moving through senior developer, and then lead engineer, let's say, across sort of a 20 to 350 person organizational growth. And as those changes happen, we get different changes in responsibility. We have to do more interviewing maybe, a little more architecture, a little bit more design, that kind of thing. Then after about 3.5 years, I decided to change it up, went to work for a smaller startup, 4 or 5 engineers. And as that started to grow, we started to recognize that there was a bit of a need for more coordination in the organization, sort of that middle management layer of things. We need to know a little bit more about what's going on, work a little harder at kind of keeping aligned, making sure that we're all pulling for the same thing. And this is where I got asked to make the move to management the first time. Now, a critical thing here is that this is a hybrid management position. So this is where half the responsibilities are writing code, shipping to production, and operating production systems, and the other half is doing the people management thing, engineering management, a little bit of project management, that kind of stuff. How many people have those split roles? Okay, so you know my pain. Now, after a couple years of that, I decided I wanted to go back to a purely technical role. And that was back with Treasure Data, where I stepped into a lead back-end role. And this, again, is a purely technical role now, just development, just operating systems in production. But as we're growing, we hit 50 engineers, we got lots of headcount, we start to find the need for that middle layer again. We need a little bit more coordination. We need a little bit more awareness of what's happening across the entire team. And so I've been asked to go back to, again, that hybrid management situation where half my responsibilities now are still writing code for production, shipping to production, operating production systems, and the other half is engineering management again. So that combination of people and project a little bit. And there's this unfortunate truth, I think, in our industry where when we make this move, there's no clear training for management, right? It's really often that it's kind of, we just say, hey, congratulations, you're a manager. Go figure it out, right? We don't really get clear expectations. There's no program we go through unless we're at some of the larger organizations. So today I thought we should talk a little bit, or I should talk a little bit, I should say, about a couple of the key mistakes that I made. Some of the battle scars or wounds that from the first time that I tried managing, and how they, I think, made me a better individual contributor, how they improved my ability to kind of enable my teams still in a development role. And then finally, why am I even considering going back to management after that flip between the two again? So yeah, a full circle a couple of times. Maybe I'll do it 3 more times, who knows. A quick note that this is a talk about people. I'm not talking about project management today. There is some overlap here, but the focus really is in terms of people and how I messed that part up. Spoilers. There are 2 key bits of subtext in this whole talk. One of them is empathy, not enough of it, and the other is ego, and in my case, too much of it. So bear that in mind. Okay, so the first area. One-on-ones. Now, prior to my move to management, I had never experienced regular one-on-ones. No manager of mine had ever put me on a weekly, bi-weekly, or even monthly one-on-one schedule. And talking to a lot of friends and colleagues throughout the industry, this does not seem to be an uncommon situation. It seems to be pretty rare for us to actually have that regular cadence, that regular scheduled contact. So I knew I needed to actually understand at least a little bit of this before I jumped into the role. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of things that set the stage for my first big mistake. And I started with books because I didn't know where else to learn. So the first book I read was this one, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. This is by Ben Horowitz. If you're not familiar, Ben Horowitz is one of the partners at Andreessen Horowitz, a big VC firm in the Bay Area. A bunch of guys who used to be at Netscape, that kind of thing. Now, I have some disagreements with Mr. Horowitz, but there are a couple of key things that I picked out of this book. One was the importance that he places on one-on-ones. And he shared a particular anecdote to support this. Early in that first dot-com boom and bust around sort of 1999, 2000, that sort of thing, he started his organization and actually rode it through the bust with some success. And it was interesting because this anecdote, he talked about how one of his middle managers was not running one-on-ones, was not doing them regularly. And he thought this was so important that he pulled that manager's manager in and said, if that person is not doing one-on-ones within 24 hours, I have to let you both go, have to fire you. The one-on-ones he thought were so critical to the health and well-functioning of the organization that he was actually willing to let people go. We could consider that harsh, potentially, but I thought that was really interesting to see how that critical importance he placed on it. The other thing that I noticed from this book was he talked about how all of these people starting companies in the Bay Area in the early 2000s, they didn't know how to run companies. They didn't know how to manage. It was a complete mystery to them too, just as it is to a lot of us now. And he talked about how there was this sort of almost a revelation experience when they found this other book called High Output Management. High Output Management is by Andy Grove, who used to be the CEO of Intel through a couple of decades, I think, their huge boom and everything. And the critical thing, out of many, many, many good lessons in this book, the critical thing that I picked up the first time around was how to run one-on-ones. And the big thing here is that one-on-ones are driven by the person reporting, not the manager. It is time for the person reporting to talk about anything they want to talk about. If they want to talk about communication failure, that's fine. They want to talk about coffee, that's fine. They get to talk about whatever is critical to them because that's what that communication, that piece of communication is all about. And as managers, we have to recognize that we need to surrender control in one-on-ones. And this control thing is another bit of foreshadowing subtext. Final bit before I get to the actual mistake. Nonviolent communication. And I'm going to come back to this a couple times, so get ready. Nonviolent communication is really important. Really, really, really important. It provides tools that help us work together with other people, tools to dig into unmet needs, unrecognized challenges, to actually discover what our core issues together are. It helps us shift our thinking. It gives us different approaches to do this. Now, when I was first stepping into this management role, a friend of mine and former coworker, Tyler, said, you know, sometimes, Jeremy, you're a bit direct. So you should probably read this book, because I had to warn people that you are really direct. And he was right. Okay, the actual mistake here. The key issue here is that as a manager, I tended to sort of avoid conflict, to suppress negativity in my team without really trying to understand it. One of my team members might bring up some sort of systemic issue, communication failure, product issue, something like that, and I would sort of default to, it's not as bad as you think, or, cut that team some slack, we have to understand where they're coming from, which is a valid position, but always suppressing and dismissing and kind of routing around it. Don't worry about it, we'll talk about it later. It'll be fine, just kind of ride it out, right? Suppressing, downplaying, smoothing over. I should have been using nonviolent communication to dig in, to actually understand these core issues that my team was experiencing. And this is really, really important because every member of your team is going to talk about things in a different way. They're not going to give you things that you can immediately use because they have emotions and frustration in the way. Nonviolent communication lets us actually dig in to understand where those common bits and pieces are. What are the common needs and challenges that everybody is seeing? Where we need to actually use empathy, in one-on-ones, nonviolent communication, the structured way of working together to collaborate on understanding what our needs are. This is really important because one-on-ones are one of the most important feedback loops in your organization. Nonviolent communication helps us to understand that when we shut down complaints and dissent, it trains our teams to stop giving us valuable information. It trains our teams to opt out of this feedback loop. And this is so important because one-on-ones represent opportunities for the purest and most raw source of information in your organization. But this is really important. They are an opportunity. There's no guarantee. When we cancel one-on-ones, when we squash dissent, when we dismiss complaints and negativity, we poison that flow of information, in many cases, irreparably. And this has a sort of second-order effect in terms of the flow of information within our organizations. When we talk about, with management, and I'm shifting gears here, but bear with me. When we talk about the difference between leadership and management, something that comes up a lot is this notion of removing blockers, right? Finding the things that block an individual's progress, finding the things that are blocking a team's progress. But I think there's a duality here. There's another side of the coin, and that is our job as managers at any level is to guard and cultivate the flow of information within our organization, within our teams. When we identify these missing links of communication and establish them without going through us, right? Hey, you should be talking to this other person on this other team. These two teams should be coordinating, right? When we establish all these this web of tiny communication links across the entire organization, that flow, that information flow that we don't have control over, right? That's key, no control, it just happens, we set it up. That drives alignment within and between teams without us having to do a ton of extra work. Without that web of information, without that web of information flow, we have independent contributors. We do not have individual contributors working together. Finally, on this particular mistake, for individual contributors, if you're a developer, if you're operations, if you're SRE, nonviolent communication is for you too. Because if I use nonviolent communication to frame my issues, my needs, the challenges that I see in our team, I give my manager more immediately actionable items, right? Things that they can take action on right away rather than having to dig into my brain. I speed up that flow of information. I speed up the feedback loops. And this can enable an awful lot more effectiveness within our teams. Okay, second mistake, big one. If my first mistake was about empathy with a side of ego, this mistake is about ego with a side of empathy. And the core issue here is that I did not make enough room for my team and the people on my team to fully own solutions, especially in this hybrid management sort of thing. And it can take a little while for new managers to learn that being the primary decider is not the job. We need to focus as managers on being convincers, on being arbiters, and on being auditors. Are we doing the best work that we can? Are we missing communication links? Do we have many decisions and we can't decide as a team? Okay, arbitrate those different options and work with the team to come together. Managing by fiat, managing with direct decisions all the time is last resort and often a sign of dysfunction. And I think this is a particular challenge for technical individual contributors, for developers, operations, and SREs who move into management. And it may be particularly harder in the hybrid case because we are used to being able to affect positive change in production as quickly as possible. It's the mark of an effective team to be able to put a change in production and make our customers' lives better with very little coordination, right? And so consciously or not, when we become a manager and we get that authority, it's deceptively easy to use it to push solutions, to push decisions without working with our team, just because we feel they're superior. You know, we're used to affecting positive change. Now we have another tool to make positive change. Use it right away. Where's Vince? Your hammer and nail analogy from yesterday, right? Yeah. Now, somebody I follow on Twitter, Sarah May, who she runs big in the Rails community, huge, great ideas on management, said a couple of really fantastic things about this just over a year ago. And it's really dangerous to put quotes on the screen in a conference because it's going to force everybody to read or listen to me, but I'm going to do it anyway because I think this is really, really important. She said that the line between service and authority, service as a manager where we're supporting and serving the team and boosting their effectiveness, the line between service and authority can be very thin. And authority can seem easier. If we don't have to gain consensus, you can go faster. But ultimately, the difference is that authority drives out creativity and the cycle of ideas that is so vital in software. It does so by design. And this emphasis is mine. Authority drives out creativity, and it's supposed to. It's supposed to shortcut discussion. It's supposed to shortcut that process. And I think as technical individual contributors moving into management with that authority, we're so, again, conditioned by that ability to just make any change that we need to make that positive change. We reach for that hammer every time without thinking, or it's easy at least. And mixing this use of that authority tool with ego, especially that ego that can come from production changes, gets quite destructive. That tendency to force a design, to force a decision, to force an approach, without working with our teams to find the best approach possible is destructive. We build teams with seniors and leads. We build teams with experience and maturity because we want everybody in the team to benefit from those aspects, to benefit from those attributes. When our ego combines with that authority hammer, when it combines to short circuit all of that great stuff we built into the team, we all lose. Seniors and leads, the experienced members of our team, they don't get to expand their practice and their skills. They don't get to cut their teeth on harder and weirder problems. And our juniors either get ignored, or because of that combination of ego and authority, we almost get parental in some ways. We overprotect. We don't give them the correct scope to make mistakes and learn those mistakes that are so vital, when what we should be doing is building decision frameworks for them. How do we decide between many different options? How do we recognize higher risk situations so that they can find those things? So this is another one of those experienced superpower things, right? Just like nonviolent communication can unlock a whole bunch of effectiveness in your teams, the ability for non-managers as well to actively scope for less experienced people, to actively build decision frameworks for them, that helps them grow faster. That turns them into seniors faster. And our team, as a result, becomes, on the whole, more mature and effective. We unlock new possibilities. We unlock new capabilities. And because we have teams that become, over time, more and more capable, we can take on more ambitious problems, more ambitious opportunities, and more challenging tasks. And it should go without saying that we all want to work on those effective teams. We all want to work on the cool stuff. This is how we get teams that can. Okay, so let's close the loop here. Back to management. Those were two fairly substantial mistakes. How are they informing my new approach to management? Well, there are three things in particular that I'm keeping in mind with this second round. The first is that the team knows what it needs already. I'm joining a team where some people have been there for 2 years, some people have been there for 5 years, even since the beginning of the company, just about. They already know what our challenges and our needs are in great detail in many cases. But again, because there's past frustrations or experience or emotions or any number of different mixing personal feelings, etc., they'll all express it in different ways. Using nonviolent communication to dig that out, to find all those different needs and challenges that we haven't met yet, to put that into a coherent package and give it back to the team. It's like, this is what you told me you know. Now we can all use it. Now we can share that context. And the second thing is providing context, acting as kind of a buffer or a conduit for context. This is understanding the entire current situation of the team. What are all of our existing challenges and needs? What's our status? Where are we trying to go? What do we want to achieve? And being able to connect that to the context that other teams are working in. This is part of establishing communication links, right? Who in the team is not talking when they should be? Who in other teams needs to be talking to my team? Who in my team needs to be talking to other people? I think this is an extremely valuable role for any manager to play. And again, I should really emphasize that the job here is not to be the information conduit. The job is to understand the missing links and put those in place and then nurture them. And finally, and possibly most importantly in some contexts, is making room for other people. There's a tendency, and I was really guilty of this 6, 7 years ago, maybe even more recently. There's a tendency, I think, for us to feel that people will step into the space that they need and own it. They'll step forward with their designs and defend their designs, right? They'll argue or debate, not in a conflict-laden way, but they'll step up and they'll fight for their idea, their design, if it's really superior. But not everyone is comfortable fighting for their space. And not everybody should be. I think our job in management partly is to recognize when somebody isn't getting the space that they need to exist properly within our team and be effective as they really want to be, and as our team ultimately wants them to be. So we need to work to identify those situations, to pull parts of the team back and say, hey, we need to give this person a little bit more room so they can be more effective, so that they can participate in the way that they really need to be able to. So, my call to action today. 10 or more years ago, I'm not sure exactly when it kicked off, a conversation though started in our industry about how development and operations could better collaborate, how we can break down walls, foster a barrier-free culture of empathy, of learning, of continuous improvement. How at bottom we are all after the same thing. And this conversation, I think, has objectively made our professional lives better and has improved our customer experiences. Whether it's from tools or practice or even just the basic communication that's starting to happen that we've unlocked within our organizations. I think that we need the same sort of change or shift in our approach to management. People working in development and operations, as much as they're part of that DevOps continuum, they are also part of a management continuum. We can and should work towards a more collaborative model that shares constructive tools and techniques, just as we've done across the development and operations, that bridge. This is things like more experienced people, or as you gain experience, being aware of the need to make space for others, identifying that missing room for other people and creating it. Using nonviolent communication to increase information flow, to unlock those missing conversations. And between both your team members and between teams. One of the most interesting things that popped up in my early experience with Treasure Data is many senior and lead engineers maintain their own one-on-one schedules across team barriers, and even within their teams, like a more formalized approach to mentorship with our less experienced members and across teams, so that we have that constant information flow. So cultivating that, I think, is really important. Did I go too fast? Too fast, but it's okay. In closing, I'm going to leave you with a reading list. This is a short list. I tried to keep it as short as possible. I could add about 12 more things on here, but I won't. The first one, nonviolent communication. If you are going to read a single thing that I have talked about, please make it that book, Nonviolent Communication. Now, full disclosure, the first time I read it, I hated it. I resented that he was telling me how to talk. I resented that he was telling me how to think. How to restructure, how I interacted with people. But about 80% of the way through, I started to realize he had a point. And I had to go back to the very beginning and revisit the whole thing with a different perspective. And I'd say probably at least half the room is going to have that same relationship, but please make a point of it. It will change things within your personal and professional lives for the better. It is hard to overstate. The second one, The Manager's Path, is a book by Camille Fournier that did not exist when I started my first round of management, and I really wish it did. She walks through from individual contributor, across the board for technical ICs, right up to C-level positions. She even very early in the book gets into what an individual contributor, what a developer or an operations person should expect from their manager. What's the contract that, explicitly, that is so often completely missing. High Output Management is older, written in the 80s, but there's so many good things in there that it's hard not to recommend. It's really easy to look at what I've talked about today as a call to more meetings. It's not. And one of the great things that Andy Grove gets into is how do you cut down on meetings, find the highest leverage ones, and say no to the ones that don't matter. Because what I really want you to do is select higher leverage meetings. One-on-ones are very high leverage activities, right? That sort of thing. He goes through all kinds of stuff. It's hard to overstate how good this book. And finally, Ego is the Enemy. Not a difficult read, but packed with bits and pieces on self-awareness, how to become more aware of the space that we're inhabiting in our teams and in our day-to-day lives, and how to just become more self-aware. Again, all of these are fantastic. If you're going to read one, please make it nonviolent communication. And with that, I'm done. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to take questions. Yes, back there. Sure.
So take modern cooking, for instance.
If you're going to tell me I got to be like a chef, I'm going to disagree, but go on.
I'm not going to tell you to be like a chef. I'm saying that this is a successful industry in
Yep.
which the creativity is that of the master and not the staff who collected. So under what conditions is that model successful for, I guess another chef-like model would be Apple under Steve Jobs. And, you know, I mean, argue about that all you want, but you can't argue with returns to the
Sure.
So, you know, under what conditions are the two different approaches more appropriate?
So it's contrarian viewpoint, right? Why is the chef model effective, right? Where we have sort of the almost militaristic hierarchy in some ways, and the argument that you made, I think, is that Apple under Steve Jobs had some similar aspects. Okay, I would say that there's actually two parts of that. And one is that we have to divide these models into attributes of setting and maintaining vision and of management. And I think those are distinct. Now, in these cases, I think they're actually mixed into one, right? And in a kitchen, it's the chef who's defining the recipes. It's not even the sous chef or the line cooks. So there's a different kind of thing there where we're almost setting vision. And I think Apple under Steve Jobs is maybe even more that, because depending on which movies and books you read and suggestions of the history, he was involved in micromanagement or not. But you know, when they started to get very large, he clearly was not, right? So yeah, I would say I don't know why it's more effective, but I think that in the way that we've been shifting how we approach product development and design, we have to separate those ideas of vision and the actual day-to-day management. And full disclosure, my experience from management is very much in the middle of things. It's more towards the edges, not sort of at the peak, which is, I think, the situation that you're identifying.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the too many cooks problem.
Oh, yeah, too many cooks, for sure. But this is part of scoping, right? So where we have maybe a lead or an architect is helping to define some subset of the vision and then letting that be broken down further by the team under them. Does that make sense?
Yes, I just think it's really food for thought.
Oh, totally. I think it's a really interesting point. Sorry? It's all good. Any other questions?
What do you say to developers that are afraid to go to management because they say, oh, I'm going to be out of touch with technology, I'm going to miss the coding, I'm going to be keeping in touch with what's going on in that industry?
Right, I'll try to repeat that question. So what do we say to developers who are worried about moving into management and losing touch with technology, losing sort of that day-to-day practice? Is that accurate? Okay, that's a really good point, which is actually why I have so far only taken on those hybrid roles where I still have some development responsibilities, because I think still being exposed to production consequences is really important for managers as well. There have been some people who have called for VP of Engineering and CTO, not necessarily within Treasure Data, but in the industry, that the VP of Eng and the CTO should both be on call as well, and I see some merit to that. It's hard. You know, as I get more direct reports, I will probably move into a 100% management role. I am reluctant to call for personal projects because we all have lives and we should all unplug at the end of the day. I think it is an organizational responsibility to prioritize a certain amount of technical participation for every management member as well, if that makes sense. I don't think that really will make every developer comfortable, but I think that sort of cultural expectation, cultural norm within an organization can help. Because I think that is absolutely legitimate. If a manager is completely removed from technology, I think that's a negative.
Just to add to that, there's a saying that says you cannot serve two masters. So if you want to be a manager, stick to become a manager. If you want to really stick with development, stay in development, because you can never be a master of two. So.
Yeah, that's you can't serve two masters. If you want to be really good at one, stick with one of them, which is actually a very super valid point, and I completely agree. If you want to be an excellent engineer, stay an engineer. But that's, again, this is back to organizations have a responsibility to define that career path too. You know, for people who want to just excel at engineering, we need to not look at management as a promotion. Management is a completely different job. And so when we want that career path, we need that same career arc for engineers as well. Okay, you're the last one, I think, Chris, sorry.
All right.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, one of the things that I've been trying lately is spending an hour pairing with some of my best developers during the week. That way I'm actually connected directly with what's going on, and I'm not necessarily inflicting my atrophying technical skills on my team.
Right.
I'm learning things, and I think it's really useful. What do you think about that? Do you think that's something that would benefit you, given that you're coming back with that?
Yeah, pairing for managers to keep skin in the game, so to speak, right? Yeah. I think that's a great idea. I haven't tried it yet. For us, it's a little tricky because I am managing people on multiple continents. So it's even more difficult. Although I have, so in my previous company was a remote first team, not organization, team. And we did pairing over video calls. And so we would jump on, one person would have the editor and we would pair. And I have done that a couple of times prior to the management move at Treasure Data. So I think I'm gonna try that. Yes. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. If you want to talk about this kind of stuff, find me all over the place. I'm also at the Treasure Data table. Of course, we're hiring. We've got lots of interesting work. Thank you again for listening.